Hello and thank you for joining us on France 24. It's time for us to cast our collective eye on Africa. First up, the headlines. Human Rights Watch releases a new report detailing the, quote, unrelenting persecution of Tigrayans. Almost 4 years since a peace agreement signed between the Tigray People's Liberation Front and the Ethiopian government, hundreds of thousands of Tigrayans are still displaced and cannot return to their homes. 518 people killed in the post-election violence that followed last October's presidential election in Tanzania. That is the official figure issued by a government-appointed commission of inquiry, a number disputed by the opposition and several NGOs. And the fourth edition of the Marrakech African Literature Festival is underway under the banner Imagining Other Possibilities. This year, the festival, dedicated to celebrating the continent's authors and literary works, will feature the special appearance of Jean-Marie Leclésio, winner of the 2008 Nobel Prize in Literature, as well as other leading figures in African literature. Welcome to the program. Human Rights Watch has released a new report detailing what they call the unrelenting persecution of Tigrayans. The document highlights that ethnic Tigrayans in the disputed region of northern Ethiopia face discrimination and arbitrary detention. Despite a peace agreement signed in 2022 between the Tigray People's Liberation Front and the Ethiopian government, which put an end to a brutal 2-year civil war, hundreds of thousands of Tigrayans are still displaced and cannot return to their homes. Furthermore, increasingly tense relations between Addis Ababa and the region's authorities are sparking concerns of renewed conflict. Our correspondent, Tom Keneti in the Ethiopian capital, reports.
Human Rights Watch says that it spoke to internally displaced people from Western Tigray who say that they've been arbitrarily detained and treated as second-class citizens. They said to Human Rights Watch that they had been deprived of basic needs like getting an ID card, which would allow for access to banking, for example. There are more than 800,000 internally displaced people in Tigray. And earlier I spoke to Samrarit Silva, who has been helping some of them in Mekelle.
People have lost their homes, their businesses, their land, and their loved ones. Today, many are barely surviving in such extreme, inhumane conditions without reliable access to food, medical care, proper shelter, or basic services. And the real solution is clear. People must be able to return home safely and without further delay. For that to happen, the forces currently occupying Western Tigray, like the Amhara militia, need to be withdrawn.
Earlier this week, the interim Tigrayan administration accused Addis Ababa of inflicting an intentional blockade on the region. The central government has withheld the Tigrayans' regional budget since October, which has meant that civil servants like school teachers or nurses haven't been paid their full salaries, hospitals haven't received medication, and camps for internally displaced people have not received humanitarian aid. The reason, according to the central government, is that it doesn't want the TPLF, the party that it fought the war against in 2020, to rearm and fight another war, but the result is a dire humanitarian crisis.
In Tanzania, a long-awaited report on the post-election violence that erupted following last October's presidential election has finally been released. According to the government-appointed commission, 518 people died from unnatural causes, including 197 who were shot dead during the tragic events. The body did not, however, say who was responsible for the deaths, recommending further investigations. A figure which also falls way below the ones reported by NGOs and denounced by the Tanzanian opposition. Emily Boyle has the story.
They are wrapped up with red ribbon and displayed for Tanzania's president. But these are no presents. They are reports detailing the country's worst mass killings, which opposition figures say were carried out by national security forces.
Total deaths which were caused by election violence were 518, including 490 men, which is approximately 95%, and 28 women. Most of the deaths were not natural deaths, meaning they were violent deaths.
The Commission's report found that the violence was fomented by trained agitators and cleared the authorities of any blame.
I want to admit that I did not expect that something of this magnitude would happen in this country under my watch. But I would like to assure you all that under God's will, I shall carry this burden bravely, with a lot of self-belief and great caution.
Tanzania's opposition figures have dismissed the findings as a whitewashing operation. The conclusions come nearly 6 months after deadly protests which rocked the country on the 29th of October 2025, following Samir Hassan's re-election with 98% of the vote. At the time, the United Nations had estimated the number of victims to be closer to 700 people and condemned allegations that human remains were disappearing or being buried in unidentified graves. The violence was of a rare intensity in a country that had previously maintained a reputation of relative security for the past 6 decades.
East African leaders are pushing ahead with plans for a joint oil refinery at Tanzania's port of Tanga. It's aimed at cutting dependence on imported fuel and strengthening regional energy security. The project has been inspired by Nigeria's Dangote refinery, and it would process crude from Kenya, Uganda, South Sudan, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. Currently, the continent imports more than 70% of its refined fuel, leaving it exposed to global supply disruptions. Let's take a listen to Kenyan President William Ruto.
We are discussing that we're going to have a joint refinery in Tanga to benefit all of us, because that refinery is going to take on board the oil from DRC, the oil from Kenya, the oil from South Sudan, the oil from Uganda, and we will just need to build a short pipeline from Tanga to Mombasa, and the finished product will use the pipeline that we already jointly own with Uganda. So all our assets become profitable.
Ghana has asked 3 of its largest foreign-owned mines from China, Australia, and America to shift mining operations over to Ghanaian-owned contractors before December or face sanctions. This is the latest step in a drive by Africa's leading gold producer to nationalize its gold industry after banning all foreigners from taking part in artisanal gold buying and selling, a move that has led to stability in the country's local currency, the cedi. Our correspondent in Accra, Justice Baidu, tells us more.
3 international mining firms currently working in Ghana have until December 2026 to shift all their mining activities to fully owned Ghanaian companies or risk sanctions. Chinese-owned Zijin, American-owned Newmont, and South African-owned AngloGold Ashanti are 3 of some of the major companies that are currently having some of their mining works done by companies not fully Ghanaian owned. This policy stems from a 2020 initiative by the government to help build the capacity of Ghanaian-owned mining companies and enable them to take part in the industry. Analysts have said this is a big win for the country's small companies and its economy.
If you want to do underground mining, if you want to do particularly surface operations there, and you wanted to do contract mining, that contract miner has to be a Ghanaian company. There is nowhere in the regulations that bar you from hiring expertise who are foreigners. No. It's that the company has to be registered and owned by Ghanaians.
The enforcement of this directive is Accra's latest move as Africa's leading gold producer to ensure it earns more from the metal as its price soars on the world market. When Ghana's new government has already banned foreigners from being involved in the buying and selling of gold and has enacted new laws that shift mining royalties from a fixed 5% of profits for companies to a sliding scale format that could see the country earn as high as 12% depending on the price of gold on the world market.
As tensions in the Middle East continue to disrupt global oil supplies, Rwanda, which imports all of its fuel, is feeling the full blow. In this landlocked nation, rising transport costs are driving up prices across the country. Officials warn the pressure is set to continue, with the Minister of State for Infrastructure urging citizens to change behavior and adapt as fuel prices climb even further. Our correspondent, Aurore Bayou, reports from the ground.
Petrol prices have hit 2,938 Rwandan francs a litre, a 48% spike in just 6 weeks. It's a massive blow to an economy where fuel drives everything. Price hikes are spreading fast, from bus tickets to market stalls. As is often the case following such announcements, authorities are calling for limits on non-essential travel and a shift toward public transport. But on the streets of Kigali and across the country, mobility isn't a luxury.
J'essaie de m'adapter, j'ai fait mon business.
I'm trying to adapt, but I can't just stop going to work or picking up my kids from school. We're just taking the hit. We don't have a choice. But if this keeps up, we'll have to tighten our belts even further.
We have to increase the prices for what we are doing. We do branding. We are branding contractors, so we have to increase our prices as well because we have our Nairobi head office. We ship a lot of items from Nairobi to Kigali. So with the fuel prices, it's becoming a bit hard to maintain the current prices we had.
Diesel prices have, however, been kept stable thanks to targeted government intervention aimed at containing inflation of essential goods, since most freight transport relies on diesel vehicles. In this context, the country is accelerating its push for energy sovereignty, scaling up hydro resources and methane gas, which already supplied about 75% of electricity, and pursuing a clear ambition to add nuclear power to the mix.
For a change of pace, let's talk culture. The Marrakech African Literature Festival is back for its 4th edition, celebrating authors and works from the African continent and the diasporas. Known as the Flamme, the festival runs until Sunday evening under the theme Imagining Other Possibilities. Louise Dupont is on site and was able to interview several authors and one of the founders of the event. Let's take a listen.
This Africa tells its own story, that has no time for navel-gazing, and that speaks of exile, borders and languages. So here we are, Africans and Africans of the diaspora, people of African descent. We are all here to tell our own story and no longer wait for others to tell them for us.
These are works that have been somewhat neglected or relegated to subcategories. And celebrating African literature may well mean giving it its rightful place, that is to say, establishing it as an integral part of world literature.
It's important to celebrate African literature and the literature of the African diaspora, because we don't have access to many media outlets that do so, but above all, it allows us to speak to young people who aspire to write. It gives them the opportunity to take ownership, to read the works of authors from their own continent, and to change the way they dream.
That's all from us for the moment. Stay tuned to France 24. We'll be right back with more news.